Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to start to learn how to use Octane inside 3D Studio Max. Let's start by opening our scene in 3ds Max, and first thing I need to do is set up Octane as my render engine. To do that I have two ways. Number one, I'll press F10. Here I have my render settings, where you can see my current renderer is the scanline renderer. I need to change that to Octane Render. So I'll select here and I'll choose Octane Render. Now my scene, my render engine is Octane. That is one way to do it. The other way to do it, which is easier, I'll bring this one back to as it was, scanline render. I'll close this render setup menu. Once you install Octane, you'll find a menu here called Octane. If you press it, there is something called set Octane as renderer. This automatically sets up Octane as your current render engine. So I'll press this one. Now Octane is my render. One very powerful feature in Octane is something called material conversion. For instance, if I have a scene, that scene is made with scanline, with V-Ray, with whatever render engine. If I press do material conversion, it automatically converts those materials and textures into Octane native materials and renders and textures. So if I press this one, let me have a look. Now all my materials are default standard materials basically. If I have a complex scene, it will convert it, but now I'm showing you in an empty scene. If I press do material conversion, it automatically converts all the materials that you have into Octane materials. Now the scene is, we can say that it's starting to be ready. However, let's dig a little bit deeper. Now my materials are Octane. Let's make something so that we can see what we're doing. I'll create a plane, a standard plane, and I'll apply this material to it. And I'll make a teapot. I'll just increase the segments a little bit so that we can see a smooth mesh. Now we have something that we can see. Now I need to see a live view of what's happening. I need to see what do I have, what's in real time. I can keep pressing render and close and press render and close, but that's one powerful function Octane is the Octane viewport. Once I press this one, I'll have a live feed of what I have. So this window, you can see almost a live render for what you have. It's a final image of what you have. So it's very powerful, and it's, as you can see, the speed, it's very fast. It's almost instant. Of course, when you build a bigger scene with more complex materials and complex objects, it's gonna take more time, but still it's very, very, very fast. So once we have this material object, I need to make a basic lighting, and the most basic lighting setup is an HDRI map. So I need to load an HDRI map, which is a high dynamic range image. It's an image that holds, basically it's an image that holds the lighting information inside it. So there is a lot of places where you can get those maps, like HDRI Haven. I'll put a link to it. It's free, it's for everyone, it's amazing. So let me start by lighting my scene with an HDRI map. How to do this? I need to press 8. 8 opens my environments and effects menu. I need the environment menu. In this one, you see here the environment map. If I click it, you'll see a lot of stuff. I need the Octane render. Since we're using Octane, so we have to use the Octane textures. You will go down till you find something called texture environment. That's the one that puts the HDRI map as a spherical environment around your scene, captures the light information, it captures the reflection information from that image. So I'll choose this one. Now there's one thing, it shows the texture environment, but I have not specified a map yet. I need a texture, so I need to tell Octane which image you should use. So I'll press M, I'll open my material editor once more, I'll bring it to the side, I'll drag this material to this slot and I'll leave. You have two options, instance or copy. I need instance because whatever I change in this one will apply automatically to this one. So I'll press instance. Now I have the texture environment options. Now it's a white environment. Okay, I need to load an HDRI map, so I don't need a color. See this texture slot? I do not need a color, I need a texture. So if I press here, I'll find a texture. Now I can load my map into this slot. To load, that's a very important rule. To load any map inside Octane, you need this node, RGB image. That tells Octane that I'm using an image, that I have a bitmap or an HDRI map or a texture, JPEG, PNG, image sequence, whatever I need to load into the texture, it always uses the RGB image. So I'll choose an RGB image. File name, I'll press this one. Now I can load my one of my HDRI maps. Now I have the HDRI map in my scene. One thing I need to do is this gamma slot, this gamma place. Usually the gamma in Octane, it comes at all textures come in Octane as 2.2 gamma, except for the HDRI maps. We need to set them to 1 to give you the accurate map that you have. Now I have an HDRI map in my scene, but in my render there's no change. Why? Because Octane, you need to refresh your image once you make a drastic change. We will learn in the future how to bypass this, but let me tell you for now, if I made a big change or something like the HDRI map, I need to press this update render geometry. So once I press this one, you will see there is an update. It changed, it gave me a better result. Now it has light information, I have shadows, I have light coming from this side. That all loads from the HDRI map. I can rotate this HDRI map. Let's skip those for now, we'll go into those later. Only one thing I might go into is the power. I can increase the power of the HDRI map. I can make it 2. Now you see that I have much more lighting. It's washed out, it's blown, it's a very powerful light, which is not realistic and doesn't make sense. So let's keep it right now at 1. Gamma, we spoke about it before. There is this UV transform. UV transform, it affects the orientation of the map. So for instance, if I need to rotate this map, I will go to translation. You have rotation, you have scale. Like if I make this 5, it will be multiplied by 5. If I make it 0.5, it will be multiplied by 2. It's like the inverse. So 0.5 multiplies the image by 2. 2 stretches the images and multiplies the size by 2. Translation is from 0 to 1. So 1 goes 360 around the image. So this one, it goes to the side from 0 to 1. If I go to 0, it's in this place. If I go to 5, it's halfway. If I go to 1, it made a full 360 rotation. Exactly the same applies here, but this is the horizontal one. So if I go to 0.5, it goes to the middle, it goes up half, and if I made 1, then it made a full rotation. So let's go back to where were we. Now I have the HDRI map in my scene. Now I have a basic lighting that I can see what's going on. I'll close this one, I don't need it. Let's go back to the render settings. This is the time output. It's when you have animation, it's range from active time segments, your time frame, from 0 to 100. That's what's mentioned here. If I make it from 0 to 150, you'll find it automatically changed to 0 to 150. Range from 0 to 100, it's you're setting up your range. That's when you're rendering animation. Here the output size. The output size is the resolution that you want your render to be. Now I have a problem, is my resolution is 800 by 600, which is not accurate because most TVs right now, or most displays right now, are full HD. So the aspect ratio, the size, or the ratio between the width and the height is different. So this is not an actual result that I want to get. I want to change that, so I need to make it HD TV, and that loads a full HD aspect ratio 1920 by 1080. For the sake of quick preview, I'll make it a little bit smaller, 1280 by 720. Now I have a little bit smaller size so that the render will be a little bit more faster and more interactive. Now I set up this one, but nothing changed here. Why? Because I need to go to the kernel settings. This is the main render settings for Octane, where you control your settings for the render engine. Now I need to see the aspect ratio that I have. I need to see the real size that I'm using. So I'll press use production resolution. If I press this one, now it's 1280 by 720, the resolution that I chose previously. Now my aspect ratio is correct. If you can look here, it's 1280 by 720, and it's real time. Not real time, but you can see a real time feedback as we spoke before, and it's quite fast. So this is one very important setting. We'll go down here. As we said, we'll go into the very important stuff. If I try to render a video and I animate my object, let's say I will move this teapot from here, I'll move it to here, and I render animation. I have my object moving and I render animation. That animation will not happen inside the render. It will not render. Why? Because as I mentioned previously, Octane needs to update the geometry, like when we pressed before this update button. So I need it when it's rendering in the render settings. When it's rendering, I need it to update the geometry in each frame. So you need to press this button. When you press this one, it will automatically update any animated geometry. If you have still geometry, and it takes more memory basically. So if you don't have animation in the objects, don't press it. If it's just a camera animation, it will save you memory. The render will be faster. But if you have animated objects, you should always keep this one on. We'll go at the bottom here to something called kernel type. It's the algorithm that Octane uses for the lighting, basically. So the most realistic, I'll not go into much details, but the most realistic result is something called path tracing. Path tracing is the most accurate result that you could get. Next thing that we have to look into, something called max samples. What is max samples? If you look at here into my render viewport, see this number? It keeps on calculating. It keeps on enhancing the image. It keeps on calculating the rays and removing noise, and which is good. However, my image has been good for a really long time, and now it's calculating for nothing. So it's a wasted memory. It's wasted resources that I don't want. So for instance, I'll start with the 150. I think that would be more than enough for now as a start. So if I go to 150, you will find that it's calculating fairly fast, and now it's done, and frame took 4 seconds, which is not the perfect result. There are some small artifacts, but for the sake of preview, I don't need more than that. And in the future, we'll discuss something called denoising, which will remove all these small artifacts, and almost the same time frame. It will add a little bit more than this, but it will make it a very clean render. The next thing that we need to discuss is something called alpha map. If I rotate my camera to this way, you can see that I can see my HDRI, which is a problem. I don't want to have my HDRI in every render. So I need to isolate this alpha map and make it an alpha, to have it as an alpha information where I can remove it and add any background I wish to make in a software like After Effects or any compositing software. So here I can press this alpha channel. If I press this one, now I have alpha information in my image. So now we made a basic render setup, lighting setup. We made, let me have a look at this one. Nothing here we can change for now as a basics. All these are a little bit advanced settings, which we'll go through later. We have to move to the next setting, the camera settings. What can we do here? Number one, you must have heard of something called depth of field. Depth of field, or the bokeh, is the effect of the lens where you can see what's near the camera is in focus and what's away from the camera is out of focus. So let me duplicate this one 3 times, and I'll set up my camera in here to explain this a little bit further. I'll not go into much details, but let's explain it. Now I have, for duplicates, as we said before, we need to update our viewport. So I'll press update. Now everything is in focus, which is not natural. When you take a picture, when you have real camera, this is supposed to be my focus area, and this is out of focus. So what I'll do is I'll use, first of all, I'll create a camera. I'll press Ctrl C. That creates a camera. Now I need to use this use f-stop. When I press this one, now I have depth of field. Basically, here you can see the effect that this is in focus and gradually it goes out of focus. There is a very powerful feature called autofocus picker. So if I press this one, if I click here, this is my in focus. If I press here, this is my in focus, this is out of focus. And you can see how fast it is and how responsive. It's very fast when it comes to depth of field, which chokes most of the CPU renders, and that's one of the main benefits of Octane Render. So, putting that aside, I'll not go much into these right now. Maybe some exposure, as it says. Now it's overexposed, 1.5, now it's underexposed. Now let's have a quick look at the Octane materials. Let's start with the simplest form of materials, which is the diffuse material. That's the standard material in Octane. It's basically a texture or a material that has a diffuse and texture. It has no reflection parameters, it has no metal parameters, it has no refraction parameter. So it's basically a diffuse, a color, which is an image, or a color, or texture, or a value, as we said, from 0 to 1, black to white. It could have a transmission, which is subsurface scattering. It could have roughness, how rough is your surface. So if we open our Octane Render viewport, you can see that this object has no reflection, it has no refraction, it's just a texture. It has a normal map, which gives you the sense of this height. So if I make this 0, feel it's flat. If I make this 20, you'll feel the height. It basically fakes the height without subdividing your mesh. We'll go to the second kind of material, which is the glossy material, which if I go from here, you'll find the glossy material after diffuse material. So the glossy material is basically a texture, just like the diffuse one, but here we have the specular. Specular is the reflection. If you can see the reflection on the surface, this comes from the specular. It could be a value from 0 to 1. It could have roughness from 0, it's fully reflective. 1, it's a very rough surface. It could have a lot of other settings that you could play with them. It could have a normal map, it could have a displacement map. The third material that we have for Octane is called the metallic material. It is exactly what the name says. It's a metal material. So if you apply this one to your object, it's basically metal. You can choose the color. Now if you go to 1, it's white. If you go to 0, it's black. If you go to 0.5, it's a little bit, it's a grayish metal. That's basically the metal material for now as a start. The fourth kind of material, which is the mixed material. What mixed material does, it's basically mixes two kinds of material together. If we look at our first material, we'll find a glossy, a reflective blue material. If I go to the second material, I will find a reflective red material. They can blend either with color, which is gray, with a value from 0 to 1. So since it's 0.5, so it blends them in the middle. It finds the middle value between both colors and puts it. So if I make this 1 0, it goes to my red value or my red material. If I make it 1, it goes to my blue material. Or I can choose a texture. In this texture, I use the checker map, which is this one. It's basically black and white cubes. So the black will take the blue material and the white will take the red material, or you can switch them as much as you want. That is basically what the mixed material does. The last material we're going to discuss in this video is the universal material. What the universal material does is it has everything, as the name says. It's a universal material, so it can have a transmission, which is subsurface scattering. It could have an albedo, which could be a color, could be a texture, could be anything. You can make it metal, and the metallic values goes from 0 to 1. 0 is non-metal and 1 is metal to get a realistic result. You can put in between, but to get a realistic result, materials in real life are either metal or non-metal. So the best solution for this is either go for 0 or 1. So for instance, if I don't want a metallic material, I can go to 0. Now it's like a plastic. Specular, the reflection. Now if I make it to 0, now it's not a reflective object. If I make it 1, then it's a fully reflective object. Roughness, how rough is your surface? So now it is 0. If I make it 1, then it's a fully rough surface. It has a reflection, but it's a rough one. It's not a smooth surface. You'll find a lot of parameters here that we're gonna discuss them later. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you liked it. If you did, please click the thumbs up and subscribe for more tutorials and videos.